This music has nothing to do with the book I'm going to be reading. I just prefer this music. That's all. This book is The Wizard of Oz. It's not like a horror book or anything that I'm reading. I just like horror music. I don't know. I'm gonna be reading 2 chapters of The Wizard of Oz. I'm gonna try. It's actually a novel. It's based off the book. It's a more animated version of it. Anime version of The Wizard of Oz. It's a novel. It's a novel by L. Frank Blum. That guy. Chapter 1. The Cyclone. Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Candace Perry's with Uncle Harry, who was a farmer, and Aunt M, who was the farmer's wife. Their house was small, for the lumber to build it had to be carried by wagon many miles. There were 4 walls, a floor, and a roof, which made one room. And this room contained a rusty-looking cooking stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds. Uncle Harry and Aunt M had a big bed in one corner, and Dorothy a little bed in another corner. There was no garret at all, and no ceiling, except a small hole dug in the ground, called a cyclone ceiling, where the family could go in case of one of those great cyclones arose, mighty enough to crush any building in its path. It was reached by a trapdoor in the middle of the floor, from which the ladder led down into a small dark hole. When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray parlor on every side. Not a tree nor a house broke the broad sweep of flat country that reached the edge of the sky in all directions. The sun had baked the plowed land into a great mass, with little cracks running through it. Even the grass was not green, for the sun had burnt the tops of the long blades until they were the same gray color to be seen elsewhere. Once the house had been painted, the sun blistered the paint, and the rains washed it away. And now the house was as dull and gray as everything else. When Aunt M came there to live, she was a young, pretty wife. The sun and wind had changed her, too. They had taken the sparkle from her eyes, and left them a sober gray. They had taken the red from her cheeks and lips. They were gray also. She was thin and grunt, and never smiled now. When Dorothy, who was an orphan, first came to her, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child laughed, that she would scream and press her hand upon her heart whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears. And she still looked at the little girl with wonder that she could find anything to laugh at. Uncle Harry never laughed. He worked hard from morning to night and did not know what joy was. He was gray also, from his long beard to his rough boots, and he looked stern and solemn and rarely spoke. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh and saved her from growing as gray as her other surroundings. Toto was not gray. He was a little black dog with long silky hair and small black eyes that twinkled merrily on either side of his funny, weedy nose. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him. And loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle Harry sat upon the doorstep and looked obnoxiously at the sky, which was even grayer than usual. Dorothy stood in by the doorway with Toto in her arms, and looked at the sky too. Aunt Em was washing the dishes from the far north. They heard a loud well on the wind, and Uncle Harry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in waves before the coming of the storm. Before the coming storm, there now came a sharp whistling in the wind from the south, and as they turned their eyes that way, they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly, Uncle Harry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he called to his wife. "I'll go back. I'll go look after the stock." Then he ran towards the shutters where the cows and horses were kept. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door. One glance told her the danger close at hand. "Quick, Dorothy," she screamed. "Run to the cellar." Toto dropped off of Dorothy's arms and hid underneath the bed, and the girl, started to get him. Aunt Em, badly frightened, threw open the trap door in the floor and crawled down the ladder into the small dark hole. Dorothy called Toto at last and started to follow her aunt. When she was halfway across the room, there came a great shriek from the wind, and the house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down suddenly on the floor. A strange thing then happened. The house whirled around 2 or 3 times and rose slowly through the air. Dorothy felt as if she were going up in a balloon. The north and south winds met where the house stood and made a exact center of the cyclone. In the middle of a cyclone, the air is genuinely still. But the great pressure of the wind on every side of the house rose up higher and higher until it was at the very top of the cyclone. There it remained, and it was carried miles and miles away as easily as you could carry a feather. It was very dark. The wind howled horribly around her, but Dorothy found she was riding quite easily. After the first few falls around and around, one after another, another time when the house tipped terribly, she felt as if she were being rocked gently like a baby in a cradle. Toto did not like it. He ran about the room, now here and now there, barking loudly. Bark, 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 bark. But Dorothy sat quite still on the floor and waited to see what would happen. Once Toto got too near the open trap door and fell in. And at first, the little girl thought she had lost him, but soon she saw one of his ears sticking out up through the hole. For the strong pressure of the wind was keeping him up so that he could not fall. She crept into the hole, caught Toto by the ear, and dragged him into the room again, afterward closing the door so that no more accidents could happen. Hour after hour passed away, and slowly Dorothy got over her fright. But she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked so loudly about her, all about her, that she nearly became deaf. At first she had wondered if she would be dashed to pieces when the house fell again. But as the hours passed and nothing terrible happened, she stopped worrying and resolved to wait calmly and see what the future would bring. At last she crawled over the swaying floor to her bed and laid down upon it, and Toto followed and laid down beside her. In spite of the swaying of the house and the wailing of the wind, Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell fast asleep. Chapter 11. Chapter 2. The Council with the Bunchos. I probably butchered that. I don't not know. I will not be reading it again. She was awoken by a shock so sudden and severe that if Dorothy had not been laying on a soft bed, she might have been hurt. As it was, the jar made her catch her breath and wonder what had happened. And Toto put his cold little nose onto her face and whined dismally. Dorothy sat up and noted that the house was not moving, nor was it dark, for the bright sunlight came in at the window, flooding the little room. She sprang from her bed, and with Toto in her heels, ran and opened the door. The little girl gave a cry of amazement and looked about her. Her eyes grew bigger. And bigger at the wonderful sight she's seen. Phone now to turn this down. At wonderful sight she has seen. The cyclone had set the house down very gently. For a cyclone in the midst of the country of marvelous beauty. There were lovely patches of green sward all about, with stately trees bearing rich and luscious fruits. Banks of glorious flowers were on every hand, and birds with rare and brilliant plumage sang and fluttered in the trees and bushes. A little way off was a small brook, rushing and sparkling alone between green banks, and muttering in a voice very graceful to a little girl who had lived so long on a dry gray valleys. While she stood looking eagerly at the strange and beautiful sights, she noticed coming towards her a group of queer people who she had ever seen in her eyes. Oh, she had never ever seen such a queer group before. This is not in the book. I am just improvisationing this whole thing. I can get on with the story now. They were not as big as grown folk as she had always been told, but neither were they very small. In fact, they seemed about as tall as Dorothy, who was a well-grown child for her age. Don't mean to brag. That's not a story. Although they were so far as looks go, many years older. 3 were men and 1 a woman, and all were oddly dressed. They wore round hats. They rose to their feet, the point of the toe, to point a foot upon the head. The heads were a little boing, bells around the brims that tinkled sweetly as they moved. The hats of the men were blue. The little woman's hat was white. She wore a white gown that hung in pleats from her shoulders. Over it were sprinkled little stars. That glistened in the sun like diamonds. The men were dressed in blue of the same shade as their hats, and wore well-polished boots with a deep roll of blue at the tops. The men, Dorothy thought, were about as old as Uncle Harry, for 2 of them had beards, but the little woman was doubtless much older. Her face was covered with wrinkles. Her hair was nearly white. She walked rather stiffly. When these people drew near the house where Dorothy was standing in the doorway, They paused and whispered among themselves, as if afraid to come further. But the little old woman walked up to Dorothy, made a little bow, and said in a sweet voice, "Are you welcome, most notable sorcerer, to a land of muskets? We are so grateful to have you, to you, for having killed the wicked witch of the East, and for setting our people free from bondage." Isn't that a lovely voice, listener? Dorothy listened to this speech with wonder. What could the little woman possibly mean by calling her a sorcerer and saying she had killed the wicked witch of the East? Dorothy was an innocent and harmless little girl. She had been carried by a cyclone many miles from home. She had never killed anything in her life, but the little woman evidently expected her to answer, so Dorothy said with hesitation, "After you, woman. I'm going back to Hollywood." She did not say that. Dorothy said, "You are very kind, but there must be a mistake. There must be some mistake. Let's see. I have not killed anything. Your house did." "Anyway," replied the old woman with a laugh, "and that is the same thing. See," she continued, pointing to the corner of the house. "There are her 2 feet, still sticking out from under the brick of the wood." Dorothy looked and gave a little cry of fright. There, indeed, just under the corner of the great beam the house rested on, 2 feet were sticking out. Sword and silver shoes with pointed toes. Oh dear, oh dear, cried Dorothy, clasping her hands together in domain. The house must have fallen on her. Whatever shall I do? "There is nothing to be done," said the little woman calmly. "But who was she?" asked Dorothy. "She was the wicked witch of the East, as I said," answered the little woman. "She had held all the muskets in bondage for many years, making them slave for her night and day. Now they are all set free, and very grateful to you for the favor. Who are the muskets?" inquired Dorothy. "They are the people who live in the land of the East, where the wicked witch ruled." "Are you a Muskin?" asked Dorothy. "No, but I am their friend, although I live in the land of the North." When they saw the wicked witch, the witch of the East, was dead, the muskets sent a swift message to me. and I came at once. I am the wicked witch of the north. Oh, gracious, cried Dorothy. Are you a real witch? Yes, indeed, answered the little woman. But I am a good witch, and the people love me. I am not as powerful as the wicked witch was who ruled here. Or I should have set the people free myself. But I thought all witches were wicked, said the girl. I'm gonna turn the music off. We're just gonna freestyle. But I thought all witches were wicked, said the girl, who was half frightened at facing a real witch. Oh, no, that is a great mistake. There were only 4 witches in all the land of Ood, and 2 of them, those who live in the north and the south, are good witches. I know this is true, for I am one of them myself, and cannot be mistaken. Those who dwell in the north, in the east, and the west were indeed wicked witches. But now that you have killed one of them, there is but one wicked witch in all of the land of Oo, the one who lives in the west. But, said Dorothy, after a moment's thought, Aunt Em had told me that the witches were all dead years and years ago. Who's Aunt Em? Inquired the little woman. She is my aunt who lives in Kansas, where I came from. The witch of the north seemed to think in for a time, with her head bowed and her little eyes upon the ground. Then she looked up and said, I do not know where Kansas is, for I have never heard that country mentioned before. But tell me, is it a civilized country? Oh, yes, replied Dorothy. Then that counted for it. In the civilized countries, I believe, there are no witches left, nor wizards, nor sorcerers, nor magicians. But you see, the land of Oo has never been civilized. For we are cut off from all the rest of the world. Therefore, we still have witches and wizards among us. Who are the wizards? Asked Dorothy. Oz himself is the great wizard, answered the witch, shrinking her voice to a whisper. He is most powerful than all the rest of us together. He lives in the city of emeralds. Dorothy was going to ask another question, but just then the munchkins, who had been standing silently by, gave a loud shout and pointed to the corner of the house where the wicked witch had been lying. What is it? Asked the little woman, and looked and began to laugh. The feet of the dead witch have disappeared entirely. Nothing was left but silver shoes. She was so old, explained the witch of the north, that she dried up quickly in the sun. That is the end of her. But the silver shoes are yours, and you shall have them to wear. She reached down and picked up the shoes, and after shaking the dust off of them, handed them to Dorothy. The Witch of the East was proud of them. Those silent silver shoes, said one of the Munchkins, and there is some charm connected with them, but what is it? But what it is, we never knew. Dorothy carried the shoes into the house and placed them on the table. Then she came out again, and the Munchkins sighed. I am obnoxious. I am obnoxious to go back to my aunt and uncle, for I am sure they will worry about me. Can you help me find my way? The Munchkins and the witch first looked at one another, and then Dorothy, and then shook their heads. At the east, not far from here, she said one. A little bit of a fun fact for you. In the original book, Dorothy could have left the whole time. You know why? She could have just clapped her shoes together, and she could have left and avoided this whole situation. It said that in the original. She could have left the whole time. She would never met her friends, though. Don't tell her. Let her experience it on her own. She's got a long journey ahead of her. At the east, not far from here, said one, there is a great desert, and none can live to cross it. It is the same at the south, said another, for I have been there and said it. The south is the country of the Quadlings, I am told, said the third man. That it is the same as the west, and the country where the Winkles live. It is ruled by the wicked witch of the west, who would make her slave, who would make you slave her slave, if you passed her way. The north is my home, said the old woman, and at the edge is the same great desert that surrounds this land of Oz. I'm afraid, my dear, you have to live with us. Dorothy began to sob at this, for she felt lonely among all these strange people. Her tears seemed to be grieve this kind-hearted munchkins, for they immediately took out their handkerchiefs, and begin to weep. Also, as for the old woman, she took off her cap and balanced the top of the end of her nose, and balanced the point on the end of her nose while she counted 1, 2, 3 in a solemn voice. At once the cap changed to a slate, on which was written in big chalk marks, "Let Dorothy go to the City of Emeralds." The City of Emeralds, where the old Grand Master is, the witch, the wizard, the great wizard. The little old woman took the slate from her nose and, having read the words on it, asked, "Is your name Dorothy, my dear?" "Yes," asked the child, answered the child. Look up in drying her tears. "Then you must go to the City of Emeralds. Perhaps Oz will help you." "Where's the city?" asked Dorothy. "It is exactly in the center of the country, and is ruled by Oz, the great wizard I told you of." "Is he good? Is he a good man?" inquired the girl nauseously. "He is a good wizard. Whether he is a man or not, I cannot tell, for I have never seen him." "How can I get there?" asked Dorothy. "You must walk. It's a long journey through a country that is sometimes pleasant and sometimes dark and terrible. However, I will use all my magic, all the magic arts I know to keep you from harm. Won't you go with me?" pleased the girl, who began to look upon the old woman. Is she her only friend? "No, I cannot do that," she replied. "But I will give you my kiss, and no one will dare injure a person who has been kissed by the Witch of the North." She came close to Dorothy and kissed her gently on the forehead, where her lips touched the girl. They left a round, shiny mark as Dorothy found her out soon after. The road of the Emerald City is paved paved with yellow brick, said the witch. "So you cannot miss it. When you get to Oz, do not be afraid of him, but tell your story and ask him to help you." "Goodbye, my dear." The three munchkins bowed low to her and wished her a pleasant journey, after which they walked away through the trees. I'm laughing because there's actually a musical. They didn't walk away in the original. They were singing the Yellow Brick Road. That's why I'm laughing. There's no music in this. It's just, see ya. I like the music. The witch gave Dorothy a friendly little nod. Whirled around on her left heel 3 times, and straightway disappeared, much to the surprise of little Toto, who barked after her loudly enough when she had gone, because he had been afraid even to growl while he stood by. But Dorothy, knowing her to be a witch, had expected her to disappear in just that way, and was not surprised in the least. I'll read another chapter later, probably when I feel like it.